Quincy, Massachusetts, November 10, 1818. To John Quincy, my ever dear, ever affectionate, ever dutiful and devoted son. The bitterness of death is past. The grim spectre, so terrible to human nature, has no sting left for me. The separation cannot be so long as 20 separations heretofore. The pangs and the anguish have not been as great as when you and I embarked for France in 1778. Your letter of the 2nd was all that I expected. Never was a more dutiful son, never a more affectionate mother, a more affectionate wife, a more staunch helpmeet. Never such a dear, dear friend. Oh, Abigail.
Oh, John.
I lay last night in the well-known chamber and dreamed I saw a lady tripping it over the hills and spreading light and beauty and glory all around her. At first I thought it was Aurora, bringer of the dawn, with her fair complexion, her crimson blushes, and her million charms and graces. But I soon discovered it was Diana, a lady infinitely dearer to me and more charming. You may be sure that I was mortified when I found I had only been dreaming, but the impression, however, of this dream most affected me, since I had lost my Diana.
Do not grieve, John. I was ready to go.
But I never thought that you would go first, Abigail, and I, all but 10 years your senior. This separation leaves me quite unprepared.
Oh, did you not just remind John Quincy? This is not the first time we have been apart, my dear. Why, I often had more of your correspondence than your company.
'Twas you who chose to court an itinerant lawyer. Yet all my travels in the service of the pomp, nonsense, foppery, folly, frippery, politics, luxury, and the soul-confounding wrangles of the law always gave me higher relish for the spirit, taste, and sense of your company, my Diana.
As I recall, you was pleased to say that the receipt of a letter from your Diana always gave you pleasure. Whether this was designed as a compliment, a commodity I acknowledge you very seldom deal in, or as a real truth, you best know.
I never received a line from you without a revivification of the spirit and a joyful heart.
And how kind it was in you, thus by frequent tokens of remembrance, to alleviate the pangs of absence with
Letters! Your letters! Were they not preserved?
The nest of your letters were to me a more welcome present than a nest of baskets, though every strand of those had been gold and silver. For I do not estimate everything according to the price the world set upon it. But by this I know I am often in your thoughts, which is a great satisfaction to me.
You were ever in my thoughts, Miss Adorable. By heaven, we were prodigious correspondents.
I think I wrote you every day. Did not I make my letters very cheap? Didn't you light your pipe with them? I care not. 'Twas a pleasure to me to write, though I wonder I wrote with so little restraint, for as a critic I did fear you more than any other person on earth.
Critic? How now? Am I not your admirer, your friend and lover, your own Lysander?
As I recall, my Lysander, you promised me a catalogue of my faults, defects, imperfections, or whatever you please to call them.
So I did. Ha! What a puffed-up young gamecock I was, to be sure.
I thank you for your catalogue, though I must confess I was so hardened as to read over most of my faults with as much pleasure as another person would have read their perfections.
Indeed, madam. In the first place, then, give me leave to tell you that you have been extremely negligent in attending so little to cards. You have very little inclination to that noble and elegant diversion.
The writer will excuse me if I still persist in some of these faults, at least until I am convinced that an alteration could contribute to his happiness.
And you very often hang your head like a bulrush. and the company loses the sweet smiles of that countenance and the bright sparkles of those eyes. This fault is the consequence of another, still more inexcusable in a lady. I mean a habit of reading, writing, and thinking.
The capital fault shall be amended, though not with any hopes of being looked upon as a beauty. To appear agreeable in the eyes of the writer has been for years past, and still is, the height of my ambition.
Another fault, which seems to have been obstinately persisted in, is that of sitting with the legs across. This ruins the figure and the air. This injures the health, and springs, I fear, from the former source. Too much thinking.
We'll endeavor to amend it. But you know, methinks that a gentleman has no business to concern himself about the legs of a lady.
A hit! A palpable hit! How love sweetens life, and life destroys love.
Not our life, and never our love, John. For we no sooner understood each other properly, but as the poet says, the falling out of lovers is the renewal of love.
Shakespeare!
Grandison.
He was right, my Diana. Though life strove to separate us, we clung ever tighter to our partnership. Why, 'tis my belief we spent as much as 10 years separated off the first 20.
Yet even as we were courting, many a storm contrived to keep you from visiting a nights, my Lysander.
Cruel, yet perhaps blessed storms. Cruel for detaining me from so much friendly social company, yet blessed perhaps to you or me or both for keeping me at my distance.
Why, we might, I can tell you, had we been together, have been led into temptation.
Well, every experimental philosopher knows that steel and magnet fly together, but with no more celerity than somebody and somebody when brought within the striking distance.
I never meant to commit any evil, unless setting up late nights and thereby injuring our health may be called so.
A good night's sleep I have seldom had, for a friend often keeps me awake until midnight and after.
Why, sir, here am I assure you, all alone in my chamber, a mere nun. After professing myself thus, would it not be out of character to confess that my mind is often employed about Lysander? Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaketh. Why not the mind thinketh?
Proverbs.
Luke.
And if I could but enjoy my retreat in silence and solitude, there would be nothing wanting, save obliviscence of your ladyship, to make me as happy as a monk in a cloister or a hermit in his cell.
Yet if I were to judge by a certain person's heart, by upon the like occasion what passes through a chamber of my own, I should be apt.
You may wonder, perhaps, at my calling in monks and hermits on this occasion, yet give me leave to tell you freely that the former of these are so totally absorbed in devotions, and the latter in meditation, with such an appetite, such a passion for their respective employments, that no mortals, save him who hopes to be bound to your ladyship in the soft ligaments of matrimony, have better security for happiness than they.
How often I reflect with pleasure that I hold in possession a heart equally warm with my own, and full as susceptible of the tenderest impressions. It is a consolation to me, yet a cold comfort in a winter's night. I have amused myself with thoughts of my Lysander, sometimes with a mixture of pain, sometimes with pleasure. My heart would bound and palpitate with the purest affection, imagining you held to my bosom till my whole soul has dissolved in tenderness.
By the same token that the bearer hereof sat up with you last night, I hereby order you to give him as many kisses and as many hours of your company after 9 o'clock as he shall please to demand.
Notwithstanding, we are told that the giver is more blessed than the receiver. I am not of so generous a disposition in this case as to give without wishing for a return.
I find you cannot compel me to pay unless I refuse marriage. which I never did, and never will. But on the contrary, am ready to have you at any time.
Why then, sir, if you please, you may take me.
Why, madam, in the warfare between inclination and prudence, I believe prudence must prevail.
Why, sir, if I know anything of Lysander, he has as little of imprudence in his disposition as he has of ill nature. As for sauciness, no mortal can match him. Nope, not even his Diana.
I shall be glad to see you at Braintree, where we shall have lived enough to ourselves to glory and virtue and mankind, till both of us shall be desirous of translation to a wiser, fairer, better world.
Mortality shall put on immortality, and we shall meet again, pure and unembodied spirits.
Oh, my dear.
Thus for Lysander, praise his Diana.
Oh, Abigail, my soul and body have both been thrown into such disorder by your absence that a month or two more will make me the most insufferable cynic in the world. I see nothing but faults, follies, frailties, and defects in anybody lately.
Just lately.
People have lost all their good properties, or I my justice and discernment.
This is no late-come disorder, John. You were ever wont to hold all to your own strict standards and speak out bluntly of what deficiencies you found. Well, if it were only the perversities of fortune that caused some of the most plain-spoken to fall into the hands of the enemy.
Who hesitated not to publish my private opinions in the newspapers, to the general mirth, the anger of my associates, and my own chagrin. How I wish I had been at liberty to give you a history of the behaviors of my compatriots, the caprice, the whims, the fidgets, the superstition, the irritability of some of us, but 'twas not prudent.
Fie upon prudence. If there exists no perfect liberty now, then never shall there be. Come, Mr. Adams, tell me of General Washington.
A gentleman and a soldier. The Continental Congress could have made no other choice but of the modest and virtuous, the amiable, generous, and brave George Washington, Esquire, to be the commander of the American army.
And you would, of course, be of the same opinion, even had General Washington's nomination not been yours.
Well, how could it not? Why, every man in the colonies was of the same opinion.
And every woman. Oh, and the Electoral Congress could have made no other choice for first president, not even excepting yourself, sir.
I was very content that it should be so.
I was much taken with the general. You had prepared me to entertain a favorable opinion of him, yet I think the one half had not been told me. What, dignity with ease, the gentleman and soldier appear agreeably blended in him. Modesty marks every line and feature of his face. Why, those lines occurred to me instantly. Mark his majestic fabric. He's a temple, sacred by birth and built by hands divine. His soul's the deity that lodges there.
Nor is the pile unworthy of the god. Marlowe?
Dryden.
Ha! Washington, a temple of majestic fabric. Can it be? My level-headed counselor, my calm conscience, my prudent Portia, susceptible to a tall, silent, striking figure of a man with a good leg was displayed in the dance. Why, Madam Washington charmed you as easily as he charmed all he met. But I hope we could allow a certain citizen to be wise, virtuous, and good without thinking him a deity or a savior.
Of course, John.
You have more than once in your letters mentioned Dr. Franklin.
Oh, Dr. Franklin. I had the pleasure of admiring him whose character from my infancy I had been taught to venerate. When I had the pleasure of dining with Dr. Franklin, I found him social but not talkative. And when he spoke, something useful dropped from his tongue. He was grave, yet pleasant and affable.
Oh, yes, most affable indeed. For the best part of 2 years in France, I had the opportunity to observe my venerable colleague's affability, enjoying a privilege which was much to be envied. Being 70 years of age, the ladies not only allowed him to embrace them as often as he pleased, they were perpetually embracing him. I told him I would write this to America.
make some pretensions to physiognomy, and I thought I could read in his countenance every virtue of his heart, among which patriotism shined in its full luster.
Aye, Franklin the Patriot. The people of France and England have thought the opposition in America was wholly owing to Dr. Franklin. And I suppose their scribblers will attribute the tempers and the proceedings of the Congress to him. But there cannot be a greater mistake.
Of course, John. They should be ascribed to you. Yet, in the doctor's countenance, I see blended with that patriotism every virtue of a Christian. For a true patriot must be a religious man.
Think you so indeed? I cannot answer for his duty to his Maker. But the life of the good doctor in France was a scene of continual dissipation. It was late when he breakfasted, and as soon as breakfast was over, a crowd of carriages came to his lodging. By far the greater of them were women to come to have the honor to see the great Franklin, and later to have the privilege of telling tales of his simplicity, his fur cap, his bald head, his scattering straight hairs. These visitors occupied commonly until it was time to go to dinner. He was invited to dine abroad every day, and never declined. And then he came home at all hours from 9 to 12 o'clock at night.
So late.
This course of life contributed to his pleasure, and I believe to his health and longevity. He was now between 70 and 80, and I had so much respect and compassion for his age that I would have been happy to have done all the business, or rather all the drudgery, if I could have been favored with a few moments in the day to receive his advice.
Yet I've heard you call Dr. Franklin a friend.
We served together in great harmony and civility, although he wrote to Congress that it were I who acted at times as though I had lost my reason.
John, I wish yours had been the appreciation which you deserved, though not in the same manner as your venerable colleague received. But methinks, the doctor's mentor-like appearance, age, and philosophy most certainly led the polite scientific ladies of France to suppose that they were embracing the God of wisdom in human form.
Abigail. Oh.
I did never wish for a man I loved to be an angel or a god. Yet I shall be full as content if those divine honors are omitted.
Franklin was, however, a great and good man.
Oh, would you so characterize Mr. Hancock?
Our amiable friend John. Great. What would he have been if he had not been the well-born nephew of a rich uncle?
Recall you not, my cousin Dorothy Quincy was his wife.
Yes, and his wife had only a peevish, fretful, feeble child for a husband.
John Hancock was much honored that he was president of the Second Continental Congress.
He discharged his duties with painstaking exactness, assiduous correctness, and conscientious dispatch, but also with an eye to keeping in the public eye.
Hide not your talents, they for use were made. What's a sundial in the shade?
Shakespeare.
Franklin.
Abigail!
Cousin John also signed the declaration.
Yes, and made sure all would know it, with a signature so large it can be read by old King George himself, all the way back in England. But yes, I would characterize John Hancock as a good man who strove to do good, always generous to those less fortunate, and whose life was surely shortened by the grief, strifes, and uncertainties of the revolution for which he fought. Only excepting he was overfond of the things of this world.
Are you saying our cousin was a moneymonger like Alexander Hamilton?
No, not at all. No, not at all. Like Hamilton, I knew to be a proud-spirited, conceited, aspiring mortal, always pretending to morality with morals as debauched as old Franklin, as great a hypocrite as any in the U.S.
How often I warned you to beware of that spare Cassius.
Spare Cassius, that is Shakespeare.
Yes. And how learned was the bard in describing for us features by which we may read men's souls. Oh, I have read Hamilton's heart in his wicked eyes many a time. The very devil is in them, or I have no skill in physiognomy.
I took no notice of his puppyhood, but retain the same opinion of him I always had. His disgrace and early death did not surprise me. I always kept him at a distance.
Yes. But how it pains me that you should also keep former friends at such a distance.
Do not speak to me of Jefferson. I am willing to allow Virginia great merit for having
Though
produced a
wrong
Washington,
in
but
politics, and though frequently mistaken in men and measures, I do not find him an insincere or corruptible man. Well, in retirement...
if he is neglected at Monticello, he will soon die. For instead of being the ardent pursuer of science that some think him, I know that he is indolent, and his soul is prisoned with ambition.
My friendship for him has ever been unbroken. What it is said that Mr. J declared that he would not have taken the vice presidency under any other man but Mr. Adams.
That has gained, as most stories do. Dr. Rush claimed to have gotten a glimpse of a letter saying that Mr. Jefferson had heard there was the possibility of a tie between Mr. Adams and himself. If this should happen, supposedly, said Jefferson, I beg of you to use all your influence to procure for me the second place. For Mr. Adams' services have been longer, more important, and more constant than mine.
Well, John, and is that not a wonderful thing?
Yes, wonderful, wonderful, most wonderful, wonderful, and that yet again wonderful, and after that, out of all whooping, Shakespeare. Yes, wonderful, were it but true.
The extract was reported in the Sentinel.
And the newspapers are ever innocent of telling lies. Were it true, Jefferson and I should have gone on affectionately together, and all would have been well. Were it true, he would never have considered the revolution in France as the spark of American liberty enlightening the world. Were it true, he would have listened to his elders and known that the overthrowing of the law by the mob could have had only one result: total breakdown into anarchy and war.
Yes, John. The very anarchy of lawlessness that you, he, and all of Congress strove to prevent upon our shores. But Jefferson speaks most well of you. He credits your firm resolution for independence, as well as your eloquence in Congress and writings, with much of the revolution's success. Indeed, he calls you the Colossus of Independence.
Colossus! See how that ginger-pated beanpole casts slurs against my stature? Oh, yes, and have you heard the appellation his rotundity? I am certain that that can be laid to Jefferson's account as well. And do not think it purely the reference to the thickening of a waistline natural to maturity. Oh, no. The claim is that I am puffed up with pompous, pretentious, and grandiose airs.
You did ever appear somewhat stiff in company, John.
I, pretentious and grandiose, the son of a good New England farmer, and a good New England farmer myself.
Yes, but your farming is of fairly recent date, my love.
And the worst slur of all, Duke of Braintree. I am no imperialist, yet Jefferson dares ascribe such sympathies to me when it is he who lives as the real, ostentatious, and haughty aristocrat in his castle. Oh, yes, despite his affectation of himself answering the president's house door in his carpet slippers. At Monticello, he is surrounded by his serfs, pandered to by servants, served by his slaves. Cannot tell me you like that in him, Abigail.
No, John, I cannot tell you that.
How often I have heard you wish most sincerely that there was not a single slave in any province on our shore.
You know my mind upon the subject, John. It has always appeared a most iniquitous scheme to me to fight ourselves for what we are daily robbing from others who have as good a right to freedom as we
But
have.
your friend Jefferson shares not your sentiment on this occasion, no, nor any of his southern brethren, which, mark my words, will cost this country dear. What say you to that?
The North and the South appear to be formidably arranged against each other in politics. But if the Southern states force us into a war, I hope their Negroes will fight our battles and pay these real and haughty aristocrats all the service due to them from the real and true
with such heat and such passion.
I have sometimes been ready to think that the passion for liberty cannot be equally strong in the breasts of those who are accustomed to deprive their fellow creatures of theirs. Of this, I am quite certain. It is not founded in that generous and Christian principle of doing unto others as we would have others do unto us.
Yes, Abigail, but the issue is not so clear-cut. Why, even your father, the Reverend, supplemented his own household with a slave.
Phoebe!
Yes.
Well, Father gave her freedom by his will, an income of $100 a year during her life. And when she took unto herself a husband in the person of Mr. Abbey, whom you know, they celebrated their nuptials here in our home. And when I joined you in Europe, I proposed to her taking care of this house and furniture in my absence, having no doubt of their care and faithfulness, and preferring her to any other family, Phoebe being the only surviving parent I had by the time.
Parent? My dear.
I have been very much diverted by a little occurrence here in Braintree, which just goes to show how little founded in nature the so much boasted principle of liberty and equality is. Master Heath opened an evening school in order to instruct a number of apprentice lads in ciphering at $1 a week, finding their own wood and candles. James, our Negro hired lad, desired that he might go. Well, I told him to go with my compliments to Master Heath and ask if he would take him. James did, and Master Heath returned for reply that he would. Accordingly, James went. Well, after about a week, neighbor Faxon came in one evening requesting to speak to me. His errand was to inform me that if James went to school, it would break up the school, for the other lads refused to go. Pray, Mr. Faxon, has the lad misbehaved? If he has, let the master turn him out of school. Oh, no, ma'am, it were no complaint of that sort. It's just they did not choose to go to school with a black lad. Oh, and do these boys object to going to church with him, Mr. Faxon? Because he does. Is there not room enough for him at the school? Yes. Well, have these boys ever objected to James fiddling for them while at a dance? How can they bear to have a black lad in the room with them then? Well, it is not I that object, or my boys, but some others. Oh, pray, who are they, Mr. Faxon? Why did not they come themselves? This, Mr. Faxon, is attacking the principle of liberty and equality upon the only ground upon which it ought to be supported, an equality of rights. But James is a free man as much as any of the other young men, and merely because his face is black, is he to be denied instruction? Well, how is he to be qualified to procure a livelihood? Is this the Christian principle of doing unto others as we would have others do unto us? Oh, you are quite right, ma'am. I hope you won't take any offense. None at all. Only pray, send the young men to me. I think I can convince them that they are wrong. Well, I have found it no disgrace to myself to take James into my parlor and teach him both to read and write. Tell them that I hope we shall all go to heaven together. And with that, Faxon laughed, and thus ended the conversation. I heard no more upon the subject.
You were wont to spoil that lad, Abigail.
I'm sorry that you should think so, John.
And it was for that reason, and that reason alone, that I did not care to take James with us to Philadelphia. When Jefferson retired from public life, I called it a good riddance of bad wear. Perhaps his plan is to retire until his reputation magnifies enough. Washington served the country as general and statesman for the better of 30 years, yet smote the subtlest stroke of all, to step down after 2 terms as president and retire to private life. after years of such service and with no obligations to anyone, to retire before the Constitution failed, before memory failed, before judgment failed, before becoming peevish and fretful, irresolute, imprudent. I too could have continued on in some public office, but chose to no longer put at hazard a character so dearly earned but liable through the weakness of age to be impaired in a moment. So I retired from politics, opting for independence and frugality, poverty and patriotism, love and a carrot bed. Abigail?
John?
Do you understand? In private life, no man has the right to censure me for following my own inclinations in retirement, simplicity, frugality. In public life, every man has the right to remark as he pleases. At least he thinks so.
Yes, I understand.
It was ever thus from my first term as Massachusetts delegate to Congress. I can ever not avoid exposing myself, my feelings at times overcoming my modesty and reserve, my prudence, policy, discretion. Oh yes, you know your man. He will never cringe. He will never accommodate his principles, his sentiments, his systems. He will never depart from his honor, his duty, no, nor his honest pride. He will never be a slave to those...
John, you will never choose to be a slave to any party, ideology, or any man. But not all have that choice.
No, not all have that choice.
All the more reason all should be held responsible for the choices they can and do make. Now here, I thought you was resigned to retirement, so that we might be together at last and have done with letters.
Well, there is no other way for two friendly souls to converse together, although the bodies be miles off, save by letter, but I always longed for better communication, to hear you think or to see your thoughts.
Oh, my pen was always freer than my tongue. I suppose I have wrote many things to you that I dared never talk.
I read and read again your charming letters, and they have always served me in some faint degree as a substitute for the company and conversation of the writer.
Would you ever write me a letter half so long as I write you? All the letters I received seem to be wrote in so much haste as to scarcely leave room for a social feeling. But they let me know you exist, but some of them contain scarcely 6 lines. I did want some sentimental effusions of the heart. I know you are not destitute of them. Or are they all absorbed by the great public? Much is due to that, I know, but being part of the whole, I lay claim to a larger share than I have had.
You justly complain of my short letters, but the critical state of things and the multiplicity of avocations must plead my excuse. Could I follow the inclinations of my heart, I would spend half my time in this most pleasing and agreeable employment. Letter writing is the most agreeable amusement I can find, and writing to you, the most entertaining and agreeable of all letter writing. I have not an easy moment without my pen in my hand.
My pen is my only pleasure, and writing to you the only composure of my mind. I want to say so many things which I must omit, but 'tis not fit to awake the soul by tender strokes of art, or ruminate upon happiness we might share, lest absence become intolerable.
The conclusion of your letter makes my heart throb more than a cannonade would.
There are particular times when I feel such a restlessness, such an uneasiness that neither books, company, or family cares, or any other thing will remove. When 3 days only did it want of a year from the date of your last letter, judge then what my heart has suffered. I have scarcely ever taken the pen to write, but the tears have flown faster than the ink.
I am afraid some of my letters have miscarried. It is as great an affliction to me as it is to you, but the times are such as render it imprudent to write freely.
I received a letter from you without one word respecting your health, your general position,
heaven's sake, my dear, please don't indulge a thought that it is possible for me to forget or neglect all that is dear to me in this world. But it is not safe to write anything that one is not willing should go into the newspapers.
Oh, methinks you need not be so parsimonious. Friendship and affection will suggest 1,000 things to say to an intimate friend, which if ridiculed by the enemy are a further proof of savage barbarity. The description of a variety of new scenes would afford amusement only to your domestic friend.
Shall I give you a history of the whole voyage? Shall I draw for you the characters of all who visit me? Shall I describe for you every conversation that I have? You must remember that my voyages and journeys are not for my private information, instruction, improvement, entertainment, or pleasure, but are laborious and hazardous enterprises of business.
I wish to hear from you at every opportunity, though you say no more than that you are well.
I have not found a single opportunity to write, excepting by the post.
I would rather give $1 for a letter by the post, though the consequence be that I eat but 3 meals a day, or 1 meal a day, for this 3 weeks to come. All my intelligence is collected from the newspaper.
I don't choose to trust the post. I'm afraid to trust private travelers. They may peep.
I have been trying all day to write to you. I am now obliged to rob my slumber.
So many of our letters have been thrown overboard.
Such a bad inflammation in my eye.
My health is quite infirm.
I have been confined with the jaundice rheumatism. Oh, and a most violent cold.
Nearly 10 weeks loaded constantly with phlegm.
My last letter was good to you, in fact.
An absolute fear to send a paper from this house, so much infected as it is.
Took a puke, which has much relieved me.
Oh?
And I feel better today.
Now I think on it, I am determined very soon to write you.
Oh, dear. I have but little news.
I have now purchased a folio book, into which I intend to write a copy of all my letters to you. Now this will be an advantage to me in several respects. I shall know how often I write, and I shall discover by this means if any of my letters to you miscarry. Were it practical, you might begin the practice at the same time, for I really do believe that your letters are much better worth preserving than mine. They may exhibit to our posterity a kind of picture of the manners, opinions, and principles of these times of perplexity, danger, and distress.
I bid you burn my letters.
I must forget you first.
All your letters are preserved, John, every one. I place them next my heart and soothe myself to rest with the tender assurances of a heart all my own.
Most excellent, my dear. I pray you show them to your sons and daughter. It is in your responsibility to teach them, never to disdain of the knowledge of the writing of letters or to do it poorly. The faculty of writing is attainable by art, practice, and habit only, and therefore the sooner the practice begins, the more likely it will be to succeed. Have no mercy upon an affected phrase any more than an affected air, dress, gait, or manner. Letter writing, like conversation, should be free, easy, and familiar.
True.
Simplicity and familiarity are the characteristics of this kind of writing. Affectation is as disagreeable in a letter as it is in conversation, and therefore studied language, premeditated method, and sublime sentiments are not expected.
Crave some sentimental.
Among the ancients, there are 2 illustrious examples of the epistolary style, Cicero and Pliny, whose letters provide you with models of fine writing, which has borne the criticism of almost 2,000 years. In these you see much knowledge, the sublime, the beautiful, the novel, the pathetic, conveyed with as much simplicity, ease, freedom, and familiarity as language is capable of.
Rotundity.
What say you, my dear?
Yes, knowledge is a fine thing, and Mother Eve thought so. Yet she smarted so severely for hers, most of her daughters have been afraid of it ever since. When it comes to the education of my own children, I soon find myself out of my depth and destitute in
curiosity equal and more. In learning, to tell you the truth, I admire the ladies in France. Now, don't be jealous. They are handsome and very well educated. Their accomplishments are exceedingly brilliant, and their knowledge of letters and the arts exceeds that of the English ladies much, I believe.
I can hear of the brilliant accomplishments of any of my sex with pleasure, but at the same time regret the narrow, trifling, contracted education of the females of my own country. Oh, you need not be reminded how much female education is neglected or how fashionable it has become to ridicule female learning. It is my happiness to acknowledge that I am connected with a person of a more generous mind, but I cannot forbear sharing some generous sentiments I met with lately upon the subject. If women, says the writer, are to be esteemed our enemies, methinks it is an ignoble cowardice thus to disarm them and not allow them the same weapons we use ourselves.
Defoe.
But if they deserve the title of our friends,
I know it's not Shakespeare.
it is an inhumane tyranny to debar them of privileges of ingenious education, which would also render their friendship so much more delightful to themselves and us.
Very true, my dear. In reading history, you will generally observe when you light upon a great character, whether a general, a statesman, or philosopher, there is usually some female about him, either in the character of a mother, a wife, or a sister, who has knowledge and ambition above the ordinary level of women, and that much of his eminence is owing to her precepts, example, or instigation in some shape or other.
Yes, but learning cannot be attained by chance, John. It must be sought for with ardor and diligence. If we mean to have heroes, statesmen, and philosophers, then we must have learned women. The world perhaps would laugh at me and accuse me of vanity. But you, I know, have a mind too enlarged and liberal to disregard the sentiment.
Your thoughts on the importance of education for women are exactly agreeable with my own. Yet the femme savants are contemptible characters. Well, so is that of a pedant universally, how much soever of a male he may be.
Yes, but education is a prerogative to which your sex lays an almost exclusive claim, one of the many. I cannot pretend to be an adept at the art of government, yet it looks rational that a government of good laws should carry with it the fairest prospect of happiness for the whole community, not merely the masculine half.
Oh, depend upon it, we know better than to repeal our masculine systems. Although they are in full effect, you know they are little more than theory.
I cannot say that you have been very generous to the ladies, for while you are proclaiming peace and goodwill to all men, emancipating all nations, you insist on retaining absolute power over wives. But you must remember this. Arbitrary power is like most other things which are very hard, very liable to be broken.
We dare not exert our power to its fullest extent. We are obliged to go fair and softly. And in practice, you know, we are the subjects.
Oh, we have too many high-sounding words and too few actions that correspond with them.
Men have only the names of masters, and rather than give this up, which would subject us completely to the despotism of the petticoat, I hope General Washington and all our brave heroes would fight. I begin to think our enemies as deep as they are wicked. After stirring up Indians, Tories, bigots, Canadians, and Roman Catholics, at last they have stimulated the ladies to demand new privileges and threaten to rebel.
That your sex are naturally tyrannical is a truth so thoroughly established as to admit of no dispute. But such of you as wish to be happy willingly give up the harsh title of master for the more tender and endearing one of friend. Why then not put it out of the power of the lawless and vicious to use us with cruelty and indignity? Men of sense in all ages abhor the customs which treat us as the vassals of your sex only. I long to hear that you have declared in the new code of laws that that you remember the ladies and are more generous and favorable to them than their ancestors. Do not put so much power into the hands of the husbands. Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could. If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion, and will not hold ourselves bound by any law in which we have no voice or representation. What say you? Do you not approve of that speech? Am I not a courageous being? Courage is a laudable and glorious virtue in your sex. Why not in mine?
You really are very brave, my dear. You are a heroine. As to your extraordinary code of laws, my Portia, I cannot but laugh. We have been told that our revolution has loosened the bands of government everywhere, that children and apprentices were disobedient, that schools and colleges were grown turbulent, that those indentured slighted their guardians and slaves their masters. But yours is the first intimation we have had that a tribe more numerous and powerful than all the rest were grown discontented. This is rather too coarse a compliment, but you are so saucy I will not blot it out. Abigail?
I have not felt in the humor to entertain you. If I am careful to respond, it is lest some unbecoming invective. Desire and sorrow were both denounced upon my sex as punishment for the transgressions of Eve. Oh, I never wondered the philosopher who thanked the gods he was created a man rather than a woman.
Let not your passions lead you into unbecoming heat, my dear. You know I would the world were different. Since it were not but as it is, I must often take care and avoid writing you about politics because you are a woman.
No.
What offense have I committed? A woman. I will soon make it up. I think women better in general than men. And I know that you can keep a secret as well as any man whatever. But the world don't know this. And therefore, if I were to write you any secrets and the letter be caught and hitched into the newspaper, the world would say that I was not to be trusted with a secret.
I see I have helped my sex abundantly.
My dear.
Do not worry, John. I have but made trial of the disinterestedness of your virtue.
Ah, well, what shall I call you for putting me in this puzzle, eh? A tease.
And when weighed in the balance, have found it wanting.
Wanting? What? Abigail?